So welcome back to Unfazed Under Fire. I'm David Kragotz, your host and moderator for the show. And this show aims to support executives to navigate today's highly disruptive business environment more effectively and to enhance their leadership impact and resiliency. And I'm very excited today to be joined by Jaime Taets, a friend and a colleague for a number of years. And Jaime is the CEO and founder of Keystone Group International. And Keystone Group is a boutique consulting firm that focuses on generating impact at the intersection between human and business needs. And they do that by helping organizations drive alignment between strategy, culture, leadership, and a simplified and holistic approach that they've honed over the past 10 years. Now, Jaime, you've had a great career. And prior to launching the Keystone Group, you had a number of successful you had a very successful executive career in corporate America. And since launching Keystone Group, you've received a lot of accolades for your success and approach to business. You're recently honored as one of the 100 women to know in America. You're a member of the Forbes Business Council. You're on the Female Founders 200 list in Inc. magazine this year. Congratulations on that. And of course, there's many other awards that could list. We may take the whole show up. So you are also a host and moderator of Superpower Success podcast. And even more exciting than that is you're an author of a new book, which I trust we're going to have some time to talk about today on the show, entitled The Culture Climb. And so finally, if that isn't enough, you've found time to be a supportive, loving spouse and raised 4 beautiful children. And the ability to do that is amazing in and of itself. So it's great to have you on the show today. And I wondered if I left anything out or anything you would
I don't know. I'm tired
mention.
just hearing it though. So sometimes it's a blur and you're like, Jesus, no wonder I'm so tired all of the time. That's a lot, right?
That is a lot. It is a lot.
It's been a fun ride.
Yeah, but we're gonna get it. I'm sure there's something motivating you along the way. So that keeps you going. Well, first of all, I have to say, among the many accomplishments you've had, one that's been kind of stick out, not the most impressive, but pretty impressive, is your recent trek up the top of Kilimanjaro, right?
Yeah.
And you share 10 lessons in your blog about that I'm going to leave the audience time to enjoy by providing links below the podcast. But I'd like to know a little bit about what drew you to that quest, what most confronted you on the quest, and what was the biggest thing you took away from that whole experience?
Oh, geez. We got a whole hour just on this
That'd be great.
So really quickly, I get this question a lot, like, why? Why would you want to?
Why would you do that?
And it's a good question. It's very valid. But what I tell people is I made the decision in August of 2022, and I climbed in January of 2023. So it's actually a pretty quick decision in terms of having 6 months, half of which are winter, right here in Minnesota, to train and be ready for it. But I felt pretty confident after doing research. And the reason I did it, full vulnerability, is 2022 was the first half, the first 3 quarters, was the hardest year for me professionally as a leader. Now, business was great. My personal life was great, but I made mistakes. I learned a lot of lessons. I got taken advantage of, right? From an employment standpoint. There was just a lot of things that I probably needed to learn because I'd had it pretty smooth up until that point. I mean, obviously, right? We got through the pandemic, growing 40% a year.
That's
right?
great.
I kind of felt invincible. And then 2022 knocked me on my butt. And so I got to August and I just said, 2023 cannot be like this. And I need to do something that changes me so that I'm better for what the organization needs. That was really the driver. And so I chose in January of 2023, I went to Tanzania, not just to climb Mount Kilimanjaro, but I went to Tanzania for 2 weeks as a woman by myself. Which a lot of people say that's even, right? That's
even braver, right?
Right. It adds complexity to the trip, to be in a foreign country, to be, in Africa, I'd never been before. And so all of it, the purpose and what drew me to it is I felt like I needed to really shift my own perspective, which is something I talk to all of our clients, right? All the leaders that I talk to about is the only way you grow is to force yourself into uncomfortable
Yeah.
situations. I think we believe we can learn and train and listen to great podcasts. That's actually a part of it. But until you shift, until you do
Yes.
something forcefully that shifts you, it's why you hear these stories of people who have been through major life changes and they all of a sudden are like, they're a different person, right? They've finally
Yeah.
figured it out. It's because they've been through that shift. And that's was the biggest thing for me. And to pick one thing, and the blogs, I didn't originally write those blogs. I didn't start them for everybody else. It actually started as some journaling and some
You're
therapy
journaling for you and
me.
then shared it. That's great.
Yeah. And my team said, these are amazing and people need to hear these because they're, they're
Yes.
vulnerable and but they're real learnings. And so I think out of all of those, it's like picking my favorite kid to say, picking the
Right.
lesson.
Exactly.
because I had so
That's
many of
impossible.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think it's the idea that being ready is a decision, not a feeling. And I've said
Yes.
this to a lot of people lately, and I want to say that again. Being ready is a decision. It's not a feeling. And what I realized is that my business had kind of taken over my life, and it was running me, and I was just doing what I thought I was supposed to do instead of doing what I wanted to do. And I think we all get in that autopilot, just running.
Mm-hmm.
You don't ever stop
Absolutely.
to say, is this really the path I want to be on? And so the decision to climb, and now decisions that we've made pretty significant decisions in the business in the last 3 months, like transformative. And I think it's because I finally realized that I can't sit and wait to be ready. It's never going
Right.
to happen.
Well, and that's kind of like we've got a society of that kind of is that kind of like read books, study, get ready,
Right.
do this, do that. That feels like a bridge too far for me. But until you approach the bridge and are willing to walk over it,
Right.
nothing really happens. That's
Right.
what I've also noticed. And I had the same experience in my life as over I overstudied, over
Right.
prepared, and it had me miss part of life in a certain way.
Well, I know we're going to talk a lot about leadership here because that's,
Yeah.
but I think this is the gap that most leaders are dealing with right now.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
our worth, I just had this in a peer group that I run that just yesterday, we were talking about this. We are in a transformative space in leadership right now where our worth used to be just getting stuff done.
Yes.
And helping other people get stuff done. And our worth as leaders now is not in the doing, it's in the being.
Yes.
And being available, right? And being supportive and listening to people and coaching people. And I think it's hard for a lot of leaders because it's just not a muscle, not that they can't do it, but it's a muscle we haven't had to exercise to be successful in the past.
Well, and I think it's also our profession has to step up to the plate too, because if we look at the way that we've developed leaders in the past, it has been a lot putting them in classrooms, putting them in, having them read one book a month, having them do all these things in the midst of the fray, and then somehow figure out how to integrate that into it, which a lot of times if you're a leader, I really don't have time for that. I got to get stuff done, right? And so it's really, there's something that has to shift, as you say, in the beingness of somebody, because my experience, and I don't say this as a theoretical thing, because there's a lot of those out there, well, how do you know that's true, right? And my experience is the more I'm okay inside with myself, the more I want to confront the opportunities that are before me in a certain way that is actually ends up being more heartfelt and effective, right?
Right. No amount of self-improvement can make up for a lack of self-acceptance.
Exactly.
That's
well
exactly
said.
what it is. Right.
That's
And
right.
we can go to all the training and read all the books, but if we aren't going to sit with ourselves a little bit and say, where do
Right.
I need to get better? So I can be right. It's putting your own oxygen mask on. So I can be for my family, right. For my employees, for my community. That's the piece I think most haven't stopped to take a look at.
Right. Exactly. Well, and I want to kind of, given this is podcast is titled Unfazed Under Fire, the whole idea, focus, a lot of this has a focus around resiliency, which I think is a core competency that leaders have to learn today, which is how to be able to fall down, get up and keep going and be better for it, not just get through it, right? And so if you think about your busy life, and one of the things you talked about is I went to Kilimanjaro because I needed that break and I needed that experience. But on a day-to-day basis, given your busy life, what do you do to maintain resiliency, energy, and focus, which are central ingredients for leading through a day. And what do you do so you can have the impact that you'd like to have? What do you do to take care of yourself and build that resiliency?
Yeah. So we talk about, and I talk to a lot of leaders about you're the CEO, right, of your body and your life, chief energy officer.
Yeah.
It really
Yeah.
is, because there's no way
Yeah.
you can be good for anybody else if you aren't good for yourself. And I think a lot of us as leaders look at that as selfish, which is exactly what I did for a really long time. When I take that time, it's selfish. I should be, doing something with
Yes.
the kids, or I should be doing this or that. And what I started to realize is, first off, so what I do, I semi-regimented. I have to be with my schedule. I'm usually up by 5:15, 5:30 in the morning. I immediately work out, right? Get ready and work out. My husband's like, I don't understand how you're still like killing yourself and you're on the treadmill running. He's like, I don't know how you don't kill yourself, right? Doing that. But
Yeah. Yeah.
when I'm up and I'm like, I gotta go. And then I use my workout, even if it's not intense. Some days, like today, it was literally a little bit of yoga and stretching because I got up and I was up, but I'm like, my body just wants to rest today. Like it doesn't want
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
So I really have learned to pay attention to what my body
Tune into the body, which a lot of times executives leave behind, like they have the head on top of it. They don't really pay
Yes.
attention to it.
Yes. Instead of checking the box that I did a hard workout, it was like, maybe I don't need to check that box today.
Yeah.
But my
Yeah.
workouts are actually what I have to do in order to earn my meditation. And I know that
Yeah.
sounds funny, but like I do the workout so that I can meditate afterwards. And I meditate for 10 minutes a day. That's really all I do. But it's my time to quiet my mind before the day starts, right? It's time to just lower my blood pressure, right? Kind of just bring everything together. And it starts my day in such a just different way. I come into the office every day. So I'm not a work from home. I never have been. Like my respite is the office. I love it here. And so my drive in every day, I either don't listen to anything, like literally silence in my car for 20 minutes, or I'll just listen to like certain music, right? Just not words and things, to just like kind of zone out so that I can just think instead of, because there's so much coming at us every day that I think we don't just spend time in solitude a little bit and thinking. And then I have a very big regimen at the end of the day. My family knows at 9 o'clock on the dot, I go upstairs by myself, right? To just start to wind down. And I have a whole thing that I do that just allows me to kind of decompress from the day, get away from my phone, get away from the TV. So I really bookend my days, right? And it's all about energy for me. It's building the energy up and then letting the energy start to kind of wane so that I can sleep.
Oh, so the core conduit here is energy, right? That's what you're and then by you having that energy, what does that allow for and obviously we all want energy. We want to be filled up in the tank. We want to be energized. But in addition to that, what does that allow for that you feel is important as a next thing? So it's like, what does that energy lead to as a quality, if you will, in your day-to-day experience?
I think it makes me more emotionally level. Right. I'm a very emotional person, right? There's a good part of having high emotional intelligence. It also,
you have a little bit of passion, I think, just
slightly. And so, but running peaked like that, right? Even on the emotional side, even if it can look good to other people, like, I'm very giving and all these things, it's still exhausting. And so it helps me to kind of level my day out, because it takes the ups and the downs out and allows me to be, as my therapist would say, in neutral. And which feels a little strange to people, but like neutral is where your body is optimized, right? Not in full gear, not in stopped, right? It's in that neutral space, which is a bit more peaceful. And so by building in, I do breathing exercises during the day. My stupid coach will tell me when I haven't breathed, I haven't taken some good deep breaths. Yeah. And so I just pay attention.
Well, what we realize is survival mechanisms already ready to engage, and our interpretive mechanism and our past mechanism of fear is already ready to clamp onto something if we're not mindful, right? So it sounds to me like when you're creating that space of relaxation, you're in the zone of being able to be more present to what's happening now.
Right.
And and it's when that we start feeling compressed that we contract. Right. And then that happens. Now we're going down, and we have to be noticing, for my clients, they have to be noticing that, so they know it may not be perfect time to take a break, but when can I like let that go? And you might have to do something in the moment without anybody else knowing to do that. Right. So it's really, So it's Yeah, go ahead.
You
Sorry.
talk about, and you talk about resilience, right? And this is which is probably one of the number one superpowers of any
Yeah.
leader is given our current world. A couple of years ago, I would not have considered myself resilient. I had a lot of fear. I was really successful, but I lived every day and like, oh my gosh, how am I going to get through this? Like people that see me might think I was, but I wasn't. And I think that I want leaders that maybe don't feel like that muscle is fully developed yet. I want them to hear me say, I developed it by doing these things, by having these energy practices, by pushing myself out of my comfort zone, because I proved that I can be resilient and I didn't just automatically have it. And I think we have to put ourselves in those shift moments for that to happen.
Yeah, and this is kind of guiding us in another place I didn't necessarily expect to go, but I'd like to go there right now, and that is to kind of meet what's happening in this world today. I'm finding, and why I went back for trauma-informed training is because in this environment, what I'm noticing, this goes back to what leaders have thought they've learned up to this point about being a leader that's being confronted right now. It's like all of a sudden what I've learned goes out the window because there's so much coming at me, right? And what also happens if you haven't addressed anything trauma like in your life, that becomes center forward as the way that you react to the situations, which makes it very difficult to be resilient when that's happening. So I don't know if you have anything to say about that. I've been attending more to that with my clients in various ways, because sometimes that has to be addressed if you're going to do some of the things you're doing that are creating resiliency. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that as far as trauma in the executive suite. And executives may not have a lot of time to deal with that, but it's confronting the number of them that I'm working with.
It's real. And I'm glad you're bringing this up, because I am absolutely a person that will share all of this. Right. But this is something that my therapist, and I keep saying my therapist, and I could just say my friend or my coach, but it's my therapist, right? I don't have something woefully broken. She is the person that helps me understand why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling. Why am I stressed in the way I'm stressed? And I think it's so important that we destigmatize that.
Yes.
It's so important to have someone, whether it's you and you're a coach and you have that trauma, kind of coaching that you can help them through. But what she explains is there's big T trauma and little T trauma. Big T trauma is the stuff that childhood stuff, sexual abuse, like really, really traumatic things, right?
Mm-hmm.
Little T trauma is what the pandemic did to all of us.
Yes.
And so I don't even think a lot of leaders would associate and say, I have trauma, but they do, because they think trauma is this really big thing. They're talking about, we now have a society that is full of trauma that people have not addressed, which is why we're seeing the mental health issues and why we're seeing all of these things happen. And having Gen Z, generation, it's like, I'm very aware of this, because this is the first trauma they've really had to deal with. And I need to make sure they're coping with it effectively so they don't become leaders, right? That don't know how to cope with trauma. And so I think that word needs to be used more, and people need to understand it at more depth.
Yeah, and from what I've taken away from it, I love that big T and the small T, because chronic stress can lead to that, right? It's really has nothing to do with what I personally accepted, dealt with, decided, because as you say, from a childhood perspective, even if you were brought up in the greatest childhood, there could be messages you took that created that in your system, right? It could have been, I had everything I needed, but I had this sense that I had to be driven and be perfect. That could be part of that too. And then the other side of it is the chronic stress just builds that into our nervous system. We're not responsible for what we take into our nervous system unconsciously, because that's how trauma gets in. We're only responsible when we recognize the impact that's having on our life. And there is now good news, good modalities, and good processes out there that can support people and fairly, not, super fast, but pretty quickly to address those things. So they can get back to, because the executives that I know want to have impact. They want to move their priorities forward. They deeply care about what they're doing. And if something's getting in your way, you want to resolve it, right?
100%. You want to be more of who you actually are. Like, as an executive, what I can feel, and I talk about, my therapist talks about, like, when I react to something, it's because it's hitting a wound that I don't even see, right?
Yes.
That's a trauma wound. And so I'm reacting and I can't really control it because it's hitting that wound. Well, unless I heal that, every time someone says that, does whatever they're doing, right, it's going to keep triggering me which
Right.
does not affect the other person. It affects me and my
Right.
happiness and my life. And so what I started just getting motivated around is no one else is going to fix this for me, but I
Right.
have to step towards it because I want to feel better. I want to feel like the person I know is in there, that, right, trauma might be masking part of it.
Right. And the interesting thing is, if you look at some of the research that's out there, what all trauma is the fight flight response getting stuck. Right. So it's like it got stuck, and so now it's like it's on that latch that when that like experience happens, it gets triggered again, right? The goal of the trauma work is to get to the point where you can be with that experience that's happened, so you can release that. And once it happens, you've moved forward. So
Right.
it's very cool.
I love that.
Well, yeah. So now, I always talk about, moving into maybe your work more here, and I want to talk a little bit about what you do. I always talk about leaders' job is to fundamentally be a creator, that they create in 4 areas. They create by the very presence they bring into the room before they open their mouth. They create through the direction they set, right? The direction they set, and through their vision, their strategy. They create through the relationships and the conversations they have to build alignment with that vision and strategy. And they create through culture, right? The larger context. And similarly, in some ways, you talk about the importance of this intersection between leadership, strategy, and culture.
Mhm.
So if you could say a little bit about why that intersection is so important to you and why that's a focus in your work with clients. I think that's kind of foundational to what you do with clients.
Yeah.
You could share a little bit about that.
Yeah, we talk about the 3 legs of the stool, and this really comes from my corporate days, is just, the focus on strategy being the solution to grow a business. And right, I've never seen a strategy do it. I've seen people do it, right? I've seen really good strategies that don't happen because we haven't motivated the people. And so we talk about, you have to have a strong business strategy, and it has to be agile, right? Look at the business environment.
Yeah,
we're
exactly.
operating in. You also have to have leaders that know how to drive change and are resilient. And then you need to have a culture that has a strong enough foundation to withstand the change your strategy is going to drive. So when we take a holistic view, we mean all of those things. We're not just going to help you create a strategy without helping you see the cultural aspects that might impede that strategy, right? That might get in the way of it. And so it's that holistic view. And we talk about, as leaders, we believe the culture is the leader's choice. Right. So each leader, whether I can't control at a big organization the culture of our organization, I can control my team or my department or my division. And that's why the events we do and the things, it's always talking to the leader. It's not necessarily talking to HR. Of course, they believe what we believe, but it's not HR's job, right, to solve this. The leaders have to figure out how to balance business needs and human needs. And that's a constant balance that you've got to figure out. So that's what we believe and how we approach work with clients.
Yeah, and I love that you say you don't have to be, you may not be in controlling the larger context of the larger organization you are, but your team, your division, your whatever you're overseeing, you can influence that and create almost a bubble of that within the organization that then tends to have a good impact vibrationally on the rest of the organization, right? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and it's the controllables and the uncontrollables. So we have, and I'm super proud of this, we have some client stories from the pandemic where our clients came out of the pandemic running at full speed because they recognized the controllables, right? So when we all went for 2 years into supply chain issues and the pandemic and who are the remote and hybrid, and they just said, okay, there's a lot of things we can't control, but what do we control? Well, you control the way you show up in your culture, right? So when we focused on that, that's what helped them hit the ground running when everyone else was still trying to figure all of this out. And so I think it's the controllables. You control more than you realize you do, even when things outside your doors are happening, right? Economically, with supply chain, whatever it is, we spend so much time focusing on those things instead of focusing on the things that we actually control.
That's really well said. And there's so much out there in media and social media and politics that you can get all wrapped up and you have no control over it. But what this does for people, I think, and what you're saying is it brings it back. You can either get involved in the chaos or you bring it back to yourself and say, what can I do about it? Right. And that's what you're pointing to. Like, what can you do about it?
Right. What do I have control over? Because also, I'm also a human. I might be a CEO and a mom, but I'm also a human. And until I can understand what I can control, I can't have my own human needs met. right?
Right.
So I'm trying to fix all of this other stuff, but my own needs aren't being met. And I think it's a misconception with a lot of leaders.
Right. Well, and then this speaks to kind of your impact model too, from a point of view which I really love, as conscious leadership is the foundation of that model. So I would imagine that you're almost speaking to that a little bit, in that what you're saying here is speaking to why that's at the base of that model. So why? Because I've seen other models where leadership is mixed in with a bunch of other tenets or qualities, but to me, it is the center point, right? So, but why do you have that as the foundation of your model, of your impact model, conscious leadership?
And we had a lot of debate over this, right? Is it part of the model, or was it on the foundation of it? And what we decided was, if we created a list of all of the issues that all of our clients have right now, 99% of them is a gap in leadership. Has
Yes.
caused that issue. And it's not because our leaders are bad. It's not because our organizations are bad. It's because we are putting people in positions and not giving them the resources, coaches, training, right?
Succeed.
We're not preparing them to be leaders. And we weren't doing this before. And then the pandemic hit, and then all of these other global risks started hitting businesses. And we have leaders that right now don't even know how to function at times because there's so much weight, and they've never been taught how to prepare for it and how to work through it. And so we just believe it's truly, now we don't go into companies and say, leadership is the root of all your problems. And
Right. Of
let
course.
them
Of course.
discover that, because they have to discover it for themselves. And it's, 1% improvement. We can't just change it overnight because it's a learned thing. But that's our goal, is that we're having them take a different view of what leadership actually means, instead of it being a title or a certain position.
And I know for sure Keystone doesn't come up with an ideology about what you should do. You go in and do a rigorous assessment of their current situation and have them see kind of more clearly what they're dealing with before you make any suggestions for doing anything, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So our average work with our client, most of our clients have been with us 4 or 5 years or more, but we typically are working in 2 to 3 year efforts. And that doesn't mean constantly, right? We're figuring it out with their budget, but this is not something that you just hire us for a quarter, right? We're going to come in and do a project and it's going to be solved. And in fact, we don't even do that kind of work because we know it won't solve it. And so you've got to think more holistically. We talk a lot in roadmaps. And the first phase of our process is a discovery session, right? We don't jump in and assume that we know what's going on in your organization based on what you're telling us, because typically that's not what's actually happening. And we want to make sure we're solving for the right things.
Right. Now we that's great. I mean, it's that allows you to build up and take care of what their concerns are. We noted on the top of the podcast that you got this book coming out. So I want to go to that direction where we're already starting to speak about it. The Culture Climb, which I imagine I know where that came from. The climb came from, right? The Kilimanjaro.
Actually, we titled the book before I even decided to climb the mountain. So it was this symbiotic.
You can't make this up. You can't make this up, can you? That way, life works together. That's crazy, And tell me who the main audience of that book is for, and what the book's core message is, if you summarize that for the audience.
Yeah. So the people, we want conscious leaders. And I say that meaning yes, executives need to read this book, but we have leaders down within organizations calling us saying, help me explain to my organization why this matters, right? So you don't have to be at the top of an organization to start driving some of these conversations. And so the book itself is 3 parts. So the first part is, why should I care? Right? It's written for the non-HR, executive or leader that maybe doesn't have a background in that. Like, why should I care? Why is this important? With a lot of data. Because as you and I both know, David, there's a lot of studies that have been done now on business results being tied directly to culture, right? And all of this. So we share a lot of information about why you should care. The second part of the book is the model itself. So we give the model away. Right? Our publisher was like, are you sure you want to put all of this in the book? I'm like, yes, because I'm going to stay boutique. I don't plan on building this huge business, and I need to have leaders that can go do this on their own.
That's
and
awesome.
not rely on us. And so we go through the entire model in detail, why you should care about each building block. What does it mean? Stories. And then the third part of the book that really makes it different than what's on the market is, now what? What do we need to do? Because what we realized when we started looking, because we went to look for resources for our clients, and there was no like actual action-based model. Like, what conversations can we start having now? Instead of just reading the book and thinking, well, that was great. I really, it's really neat. And then you don't do anything with it.
Right.
We wanted it to be action-based. So we give away tools. We're giving it all away, essentially, because we want people to take it back to their organizations and have different conversations.
Right. Right. And the tools are like the culture compass, the culture map, and a culture scorecard.
So just some initial tools to have conversations, because we know that the tool's not the end all be all. It's the conversation that the tool can drive in your organization that you've likely never had before. We've never talked about these things.
Right. Well, and one of the things I'm interested in, I've got to get the book as soon as it comes out, but is the scorecard. So a lot of times we look at, our values or norms as ways of knowing, or the behaviors that are operating or knowing. Yet, culture has implications that are far reaching into profitability, EBITDA, compensation, how we're training employees, all these harder measures, retention, all these harder measures of success. So talk a little bit about that scorecard. What do you see as the primary measures that have that our culture is moving towards thriving and high performing?
Right. So the reason the scorecard is in the book and is one of the free downloads is because for years people have said you can't measure culture. And we just say that's not true. Right. Now, you can't measure culture at this big nebulous word, right. But the reason we built the model the way we did is each one of those building blocks can be measured.
Yes.
Right. And so the thing with any measurement that you're doing in your organization, we'll get when people create their scorecards, they're like, well, how do we know that the culture work and investment that we're doing actually is what moved the needle on this? I'm like, well, how do you know your strategy and that strategic plan? And then that binder is what's doing it. You don't. But as long as those metrics are moving in the right direction, it's a good thing, right? Like we must be doing something right. Let's keep doing it. And so when you we're talking about financial metrics, operations metrics, right? Utilization on a manufacturing plant. Yeah, that's directly tied to your culture and how hard people want to work for you, right? So we should see utilization going up. We should see voluntary turnover going down. So we have, referrals in between sales and market, right? Like we have all of these things because we're saying when we're running a better business and people feel more connected and like they belong and that they want to show up and perform, all aspects of your business are going to improve.
Right.
And so what we want to do is just create a scorecard of those metrics, and it doesn't have to be everything. Which ones do we want to see improve?
Customize it,
And then let's do the action, and then let's watch the metrics. And some of them might work, some of them might not move. So we have to say, you know what, that didn't do it, right? Let's figure out something else. But at least we're taking action and we're iterating through and trying to prove what is our formula. Because it's the other thing with culture is there is no one way to do this. It has to be aligned to your values, where your business is at, even in its, kind of stages of growth. It has to, your markets, all of these things have to be factored in. So we don't have a prescribed scorecard. We help you think through what are the things we would really like to move the needle on. And then let's start measuring them and start doing the culture work and see what happens.
Well, we all learn from our clients as well as them learning from us. So what I see my clients do with the coaching always teaches me about how I can be a better coach, right? What clients do with your culture work and your leadership work helps you. Wow, they did that with it. Let's add that to because they are the ones that are doing it, right, on a regular basis. And people are, when they get it and they get excited about it and they're passionate about it, they become creators, and they're going to do something that has never been done before, right?
Right. And that's what we want to be as Keystone. Again, we're going to give this away and we're going to have organizations that go do it. We want to be the community of, as you say, creators that come together and say, hey, we started measuring this and it really worked. Like we want to just create that community and foster that community because we don't have all the answers either. Right. We're figuring a lot of this out with businesses at the same time.
Right. Right. Well, that's what you call partnership, right? It's a partnership. And we can structures, and we've done it in hundreds of organizations, and we can bring that to bear. And you're going to also help us improve what we do.
Yes, absolutely.
Now you also have this phrase that and again, it goes back to the metaphor, but that's not why I'm bringing it up. But culture is a mountain worth climbing. Mm-hmm. But but say a little bit about why that's an important phrase for you. Why you brought that together, because it's not like it's not a snap, right?
Right.
There's a process and it's ongoing. But talk a little bit about why that phrase is important to you
And
to
again,
share.
all of this stuff was created before I went up the mountain. So it's
Yeah.
just funny to like think back on the marketing, right? And kind of how we wanted to talk about it, how we've talked about it for years. But what we want people to understand is this is not easy work, right? It takes work to be able to do it. So to climb a mountain, you're not just going to be like, hey, I'm going to go climb a mountain tomorrow. Like you've got to put the work in. You've got to be thoughtful on your plan and your approach, right? You've got to be structured and, disciplined. And so we're trying to say, you should care about this, but please also go in realizing it's not all going to be perfect. It's not going to happen in a quarter, right? There's no quick fix. This isn't a magic pill. And so that's the mountain analogy, is like, it's a climb and you're going to be sweaty and tired at times on the climb, but it's still worth it because the view at the top is going to be completely transformative to your view right now in terms of what you're
Right.
capable of as a business.
Right. And people love stories. So think about, if you could think about your favorite or one of your favorite stories of this climb you've taken with a client, and the before shot, the process and the after shot. If you can think that through and share, what does that look like in a particular client system? You don't have to name names, but just as an
Yeah.
example of something, what this looks like, this process looks like unfolding.
Yeah. Well, so in the last year, one of the things I'm most proud of is we have a client that signed on. It was a client that we had done other work with, and they signed on early when we were developing this model, right? Like, how are we going to survey, focus groups, like our whole process. And so we now have 3 full years of data for them. And we just, at the beginning of the year, got our 3rd year of data. And so with our model, and if people look it up, we actually heat map that model for our clients, right? We do surveys and focus groups, and we turn it red, yellow, or green so that they can be very aware of, there are areas you're already strong. We don't need to like do a bunch of work in that. But the areas that are red or yellow are actually detracting from all of your investment, right? In those strong
Right,
areas.
they're
They aren't as strong as they could be. And so what we've seen in this client over 3 years, and we're writing a white paper and a case study on it right now, is the transformation of those colors and the deliberate work that they had to do to get there. But they are a manufacturing plant, right? So they have got frontline workers and high turnover, right? When you think about manufacturing and the fact that their heat map is got a ton of green on it now, when you're interviewing floor level people for this survey, is unheard of, right? This is not office workers that we're interviewing. It's all part office, and we're putting them all together with the floor. And they have gone from almost all red and yellow to almost all green and some yellow, which yellow is just, you're always going to have certain things, right?
Of course.
People are never going to be, but we visually look at those 3 years and we can see the progression of where they've focused, and they can tie it directly back to the things they've done. So that's powerful, right? For them to see it, to say, we are now on this path, and whether they continue working with that, they're going to keep it going because they've seen the results, right?
Absolutely.
It's like, I equate it to weight loss. If you start to see the results, you're going to keep doing what you're doing. Right? If you don't see the results, you've got to tweak something until you do, because that's what's going to keep you committed to it.
Right. Well, that's a transformation in mindset that you create along the way, right? That as people see, once you get a leader going and they recognize, they may come back to me and talk to me every once in a while, but they're on autopilot in a certain way, in a new level, at a whole new level. And that's what you want. That's what you want. That's why we do the work we do. It's not about, keeping a reason why you should keep me around. You should keep finding reasons not to keep me around because we've been effective at what we've done.
But we have to realize it's 1% changes. These aren't catastrophic changes we're going to see in a few days, but we have to stay committed to, all of a sudden looking back. And that's why we keep a rhythm with our culture clients to say every 3 months, we are going to check in and say, what have we seen change? Because oftentimes they don't even slow down enough to say, wow, you're right. Our next level leaders are not bringing as many issues to us as they used to. So something's happening. We don't have to be able to pinpoint exactly the thing, because it's probably a combination of things.
Yeah, I find it true. I mean, people that begin to transform in themselves, or their teams begin to transform, that I see, they don't sometimes appreciate what's happening. It's like you almost have to be a mirror for them because they're still in their day doing their things. They may feel less stress. They may feel better connectivity with the people they're working with. They may see that they're getting better numbers, but they're not necessarily always putting it together with the work that they're doing, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
What at the core, what do you think is at the core? I mean, this is probably a question you've been asked a lot, but and maybe there isn't one core, but what is the core of culture change? At the end of the day, if you say, if you get this ingredient started and ignited, that's going to bring good things. That's going to bring change and transformation.
It's the core can shift a little bit depending on where they're starting.
Yeah, that makes
But
sense.
what gets it ignited is involving the entire organization, right? This isn't an executive thing that they do to the organization.
Right, exactly.
One of the big myths we have to dispel at the beginning of these conversations is, as leaders, you don't control the culture, you just impact it. So you don't get to declare this is what the culture is. We describe the culture as like it's a fabric, right? A piece of fabric, and all of you are threads. Now, the leadership and executives, threads might be a little bigger or stronger, but everyone else is a thread in that fabric. And so it takes the whole organization to be engaged in this, and for the leaders to talk about how they want, right? Everybody to be engaged in it for it to really work. It can't be driven from the top. It has to be driven from both directions, which is why we do the survey and the focus groups. And we get a lot of different voices into the conversation, because executives, even in my own business, executives, right or wrong, do not actually know what's happening on the ground. They can't, right? There's too many other things the organization needs them to manage. And so what we need them to understand is that we're going to give you the real pulse, not what you think it is, but what it really is. And I think the moment they can accept what it really is, that's the core to change.
Right. And I hear this sometimes from the leaders too, that you know, if I don't direct my vision and I'm asking for their input before I give them context, I'm opening a can of worms. I'm worried that this could get out of my control and I won't be. And what do you? I don't know if you ever have that concern show up. I would imagine you do, because I know executives, and that is a concern sometimes they have. How do you address that with leaders? That's a concern that they have. They have to just trust you, or pretty much, or is there anything you do to help them let go?
I think it's right. Well, I think and it's not letting go. You know, their job is to set the vision, right, way out there, and then set the pace, right? And have the right framework in place. And that we talk a lot about our impact model being a framework, having the right framework in place to trust but verify. Right? Are we running at the right pace on the marathon? Right? Are we where we want to be? Are we stopping to say, all right, what did we learn? I believe that leaders' jobs is to always be out in front, because we need to know what's around the next corner, right, for the team. But we also have to turn around every now and then and make sure they're still on the race with us.
Yes, exactly.
And that's what the piece I think we miss, is we just keep running. And we don't realize that some people are at the start of the race with their shoes untied, and we've done nothing to help them understand where we're going.
We're not helping them succeed, right?
Right,
exactly.
Which means we're not succeeding, right? As an organization, we can't get to where we're capable of getting to. Right.
That's great. I want to shift the conversation a little bit here. And talk about the world that we're in today. I'm not trying to get political in any way, and that's not where I'm going. I'm just talking about the world that we're in right now. And what is, we have, if you look at Edelman's Trust Index, if you're familiar with it, they talk about that the trust for media and government is plummeting, while the trust for business is actually eking up. Now, as I look at that, I think, whether business leaders want to take it on, they have an opportunity here, right? And I'm wondering what your thoughts are, and I'm kind of maybe catching you off guard with this question, I don't know, but what do you think is there, for example, some possible opportunity for leaders with divisiveness happening out in their community? And leaders, to me, unite, they don't divide, right? Servant leadership, what I call, enlightened leadership, however you call it, conscious leadership, they unite, they don't divide. Is there an opportunity for leaders to create a space of dialogue in their organizations and help the world in that way, as one example? Or is there some opportunity for business leaders who have a business mindset that could actually be used to solve some of the problems we're having in society in an even more effective way than maybe government does right now? I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that in general, if you have any ideas or thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's interesting. This is a great question, and it's not something I've kind of spoken about publicly, but I do have a stance on it. And I'm reminded of yesterday morning, I think it was, the United Airlines CEO was on talking about the debt limit issue.
Mm-hmm.
And he just said, they asked, like, what are as CEOs, what are you guys talking about? And he's like, we're talking about how this is their job and we would lose our jobs if we didn't do this. This is their job to figure this out. It's a manufactured crisis.
Yes.
And I was
well
like,
said.
yes. Right. And again, yes, I'm sure he's got lobbyists that are going, oh, cringe, we're not going to get the vote we want. But I think we're now at a point where leaders that have a platform are realizing they need to say something. They do not need to polarize it. I think every executive that I talk to, including myself, we're like, we're in the middle trying to say, we got to figure this out. Like, we don't need to be out here. But within our own organizations, what I believe that we can do is there's a couple of things. Is leaders need to create the space for conversations to happen. Yeah. We don't have to drive the conversation. We don't have to know all of the answers, but we have to create more space. So that's a word we use a lot with our clients. And creating space means this is the place where we're going to talk about these hard things. We had an event last week around inclusion and belonging, right? At our big culture event. And that was, we talked about, this is the space to start getting curious, right? It's not going to solve anything walking out of here today, but if we don't start creating some of those spaces for people to come in and learn, because what we all have to do is we all have to really challenge the beliefs that were given to us based on where we were raised, when we grew up, all of these beliefs that maybe served us to protect us at one point in our lives, but don't serve us anymore. As leaders, we've got to really be good at challenging those beliefs and softening the edges of our judgment.
Yes.
Right? I don't have to believe exactly what you believe in order for us to work well together. Yeah. But I do have to be willing to say, wow, I would normally judge that. Maybe I don't need to judge that because I now see the human part of why that decision was made. So it's that softening, not changing, everything about who we are, what we believe, but we need to be ready to soften some of those edges.
Yeah, I mean, and I think well said. I think that's exactly right, because the judgment is so toxic, and it toxic to, and all judgment is a belief that's been confronted that we have. And, as we're seeing in neuroscience, which is coming up with amazing understandings, still more to go, but that we're fundamentally, our brain is an interpretive machine, if you will. Yeah. It does not see reality as it is out there. We'd need a brain, I guess, the size of a skyscraper to actually see reality as it is, right? So we're interpreting, and then we're believing our interpretations as if they're facts, because our survival mechanisms comes in and says, you need to take that stand to be okay. And all that's happening, it goes back to our resiliency conversation, happens under pressure. And when we're not being resilient, we lock in more to that, right?
And I also believe it's the questions that we're asking ourselves too. Because the analogy that was told to me is our brains are like a filing cabinet. So if you ask a question about, oh my gosh, what's going to happen with this thing? It goes back and goes, oh, there's all the bad times. It hasn't worked out.
Exactly. Right? And that's all happening subconsciously, right? It's not even happening at a conscious level.
Correct. Versus what are the opportunities if this happens? It's going to deliver a different answer to you. So you have to start thinking about the language that you're using with your team and with yourself to get your mind focused forward versus in the past beliefs and, everything that hasn't worked in the past. I think many of us are stuck in that.
Yeah. Well, again, connectivity is what brings us together. This sense of connection has been severed so much from lockdowns and all the things that happened with COVID and then the divisiveness. And, to me, you're talking culture, and culture is a great way to bring people together for the sake of the organization and its vision. But it also can serve as a community to make us realize that what we all care about deeply is very common. At that level of values, it's very common. At the level of beliefs and how we react to news or whatever, it's different. But if you can come from a place of curiosity about that and not just go with the reaction you have when somebody says something, be curious, you get to understand more deeply what people care about. It always goes back to their heart at the end of the day, or their fear, right? Which we can relate to both.
Yes.
So,
Yeah,
yeah.
I love that. I love the curious word is the word we use a lot. And we talked about this in our
Yeah.
inclusion and belonging event is just, I stood up before we even brought the panel up and said, if there are any moments in this conversation that you feel a little shame, you feel a little judged, right? Whatever, write it down.
Right.
You don't need to tell anybody, but get curious about why you're feeling that way, because that's where
Right.
your change is going to come from if you can actually examine it through a different lens.
That's beautifully said. Well said. So, kind of to wrap up today, I mean, to me, I think what I want to emphasize here is how important it is and valuable it is for organizations to consider opening the dialogue. And I hope that more and more leaders take that on, and hopefully they can call on us to help them with that. And as you look at what you talked about, I want to keep it boutique. But I'm writing this book because I want everybody to have all this. At the end of the day, what is the impact Jaime wants to have through her business and through her work with clients? And what is she at the end of her career looking back, what is it that your greatest hope or your greatest vision for what the impact you've left behind?
That's a heavy one. There's a lot of things that come to mind. I want us to ignite leaders and create organizations, right, that can achieve business results. But I think it starts with twofold. We have to put the right approaches in place in the organization to be able to help them run well, culture, right, systems. But I want to ignite leaders. I want to ignite leaders to be better and to be curious and to grow. So I talk about a model, my third book that has started. It's about leadership. And I talk about there's 3 pieces that we need to think about as leaders in our own evolution. We need to know better, because when we know better, we do better. And that's self-awareness. That's the world around us, right? That's being educated and understanding what's happening. We need to deliberately shift, meaning we have to put ourselves in places that is unfamiliar to us, right? We have to examine those beliefs and, right, be willing to really look at them and be curious, and then we can grow. A lot of us believe that we can just train ourselves to growth, right? We can read enough books or listen. I think the shifting is where the growth actually happens. And so I want to be part of shifting people and having them see a different view.
Yeah, we're already making the ground move and things change. I can't imagine what's going to happen over the next number of years. So really, really great. Is there anything else you want to say to feel complete with today, or anything else you want to share as we close out? What do you think?
It's just, we've talked about a lot of things, and there's a lot of pressures on leaders today. And so what I want to end with is just like, this isn't, you need to do all of these things and be perfect at all of these things. Right? No CEO on the most successful business is great at all the things a CEO needs to do.
Exactly.
But choose what you want to be really good at, and get really curious about the other areas, and just start to shift. Hopefully this podcast is something, if it is making you go, I need to do better, pick one thing, right? Don't overcomplicate your way to success, right? Save that energy for the work you have to do, right, along the journey, but like pick something.
Yeah. I mean, I love what you said earlier. It's 1% a day. If you make a 1% shift a day, and like the other idea that, the idea that your vision may be huge, that's not going to happen today. You want to hold that in your mind foremost, but be present on today. And to me, vision is activated now, right? And it builds with each you stack moments, and those stacking of moments turn into the reality, the vision turning into reality over time. Right.
I think we look at the obstacles that we hit on our way to our vision, right? Or whatever it is, we look at them as they're in our way.
Yeah.
I actually believe they are the way.
Yes, they are the way. They're created by the very vision you have. You wouldn't have the obstacle. You're right. Right. Exactly. That's so well said. So thank you very much, Jaime, for joining me today. I really appreciate the time you took, and always delight to have to talk and have these conversations with you.
Thank you for creating the space for these conversations, because these are really important ones.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. And I want to just thank everybody else for joining us today in this great, enriching conversation. I'm David Kragotz of Unfazed Under Fire, and we will see you back next time. Thanks for joining us.